If you haven't yet heard of Quarken, that's perfectly understandable. It's an entirely new brand from the far north of Finland, from a place in fact called Quarken, which is a relatively narrow island-strewn region of the Gulf of Bothnia, where these boats are designed and, interestingly enough, built as well. So Quarken, of course, is an anglicised version of that place name to make it more accessible to the international markets. And to this point, there's only one platform in that Quarken fleet. It's the 27-footer. Now that's available, as you would expect of a modern weekender, in three configurations. There's the open boat, there's the T-top that you see here, and there's also a cabin version. Now we're told by Quarken that that's going to be joined very soon by a 33-footer and a 40-footer, so it's reasonable to expect that both of those boats will be available in those same base three configurations. But as things stand, this 27-footer is the only platform in the fleet, and this 27 T-top is the only model of its kind in the whole of the UK. So we're very grateful to Boat Point down in Gosport for giving us the chance to test it. Before we actually get on board and investigate the internals, I just want to talk a little bit about the hull itself. Now clearly we have this plumb bow, and that's a feature we've seen on a lot of competitor models in this fast weekender market. Clearly it looks beautiful. It also extends that waterline length for increased running efficiency, and it also gives you better directional tracking when you're off the plane. But in this case, it's combined with a really prodigious bow flare here. Lots of extra fiberglass, this kind of lip that sticks way out here gives you extra beam at the bow, and it's designed for splash deflection, but it does some good things in terms of space management in the bow. So we'll talk about that a little later on. Now as you move back, that flare gives way to a thick rubbing strake that takes on the job of splash deflection. And we move back here to where you see another vital accessory of this particular sector, which is twin hull steps. Again, they look magnificent, and they're designed to introduce a little bit of air to those planing surfaces just to free up the hull, get extra revs, a bit of extra pace, extra running efficiency. But what I really love here is this section. What we have forward there is a window. This is not a window at all. This is a stylistic device, and it kind of looks a little like a windy Coho 29, which in itself is a gorgeous and very seductive boat. And it picks up the perfect angle of the hull step just below, so it looks superb. It's optional, but it's certainly an option I would look to take. And then further aft, another thing that really differentiates this Quarken 27 is that engine. That's a Yamaha F300. The 4.2 litre V6 weighs little more than 250 kilos, and unlike most of the competitors at this sort of length, who offer single and twin rigs and horsepower options of up to about 450 horsepower, this boat was designed for and around that F300, which on the face of it seems relatively modest, but they're quoting 44 knot top end and running efficiency of about 1.4 litres per nautical mile. So it'll be really interesting when we get this underway to see if it lives up to that hype. In the absence of that twin rig, there's loads of space back here, and it's really very well used, not least for this huge integrated wraparound swim platform that enables you to step on at the port side and wander around using the swim arch as a grab rail and get into the cockpit without having to clamber over furniture or over the gunnels to get into that cockpit and feel safe. Now back at this back end, we also have space for 3 people to use these aft facing cushions. Brace yourself again on that arch and spot a skier, spot a wakeboarder, or just sit there on a calm day and watch your wake disappearing into the horizon. It's very rare that you get this many aft facing seats, and it's a very attractive feature. Now when we make our way forward past the obligatory transom shower and also the manual bilge pump, things are equally user-friendly. We've got another 3 forward-facing seats here opposite a dining table, and because the 2 helm seats are both reversible, it means you could easily fit perhaps 6 or 7 people here for a relaxed lunch. And as I hope I'm about to prove, it's also very easy to convert this into a sunbathing platform. So you simply remove the table, get that out of the way down here, unscrew your 2 larger legs and open up your locker, and because we've got these nice strong rams and cantilever hinges, it opens up no problem with the cushion still intact and without you having to use two hands and fiddle about. It's an easy one-handed operation. And then you simply whack in your smaller legs, pop your table back in position, and once that is done, this backrest hinges straight over into position, and we have another infill, again under a very easy to open hatch that slots into place with, as you can see, a couple of elastic fixtures to hold it down to that table section. You also have a fold-out foot brace to keep the guys here at the helm comfortable when they're facing aft. And this is a really impressive section, because if people are not sitting here, you can make your way forward via this section, or you can use the extra bit of deck space to starboard if that's all too busy, to make your way around this way and then head forward to the bow. So in all respects, that's a very impressive section. Now, as I say, storage on this boat is really very good, but before I get into that, I just want to show you one thing that I forgot. It's a fault of the boat, really. There's too much to look at in this cockpit. It's this port side removable backrest, which can be taken, slotted forward to face aft, giving you arguably, on a boat rich with great places to sit, the finest seat in the house. Now let's get into that storage right now, because beneath the deck you might think lots of storage, but that's not the case. We've got a big fuel tank down there, 300 litres, plus the RCD unit and the charger, so that's not for storage at all. And beneath the helm seats we've got a pull-out fridge, so there's no storage under there either. But what we do have in this section is lovely, deep, regularly shaped storage, very square, very rectangular, so you can fit big bulky items in here. We also have the electrics, the starter battery, the domestic battery, and an additional one for your windlass and your bow thruster. I'd like to see some sort of extra partitioning in here, because you don't want your baggage to be bumping around and hitting your fuse switches, activating or deactivating things that you don't want deactivating. But they do apparently offer a fabric partition to mitigate that problem. And what's particularly good here is the fact that this space is equally accessible from the back end, where we have shore power, and we also have a neat little cutout in the fiberglass lip so that you can lead the cable through there without fouling it. But what's really useful on a boat that's designed for these kind of day applications is the port side locker. Again, it's accessible from both ends, one-handed, and because it's very long, it's the ideal place to store your gear if you're out for a day of fishing or wakeboarding or water skiing. It's very impressive indeed. As you make your way to the bow, you go up a couple of steps, which increases, of course, the volume in the cabin down below. The gunnels are nice and high, and as you step up, you get these optional rails to keep you feeling secure. And the beam in here feels surprisingly generous. We've got 3 forward-facing seats. The central one of those, this is an option, enables you to ditch your gear straight down into the cabin if you're going on a weekend jaunt. And you also get this table with a trio of cup holders, so you can relax and have lunch up here. Or, in the same way as in the aft cockpit, you can configure this quite easily to create a nice lounging space. Let's pop this away inside the anchor locker where it belongs. That's something else quite nice about this boat, is everything seems to have a place where it belongs. Nothing just floats about aimlessly. And then the idea is you just slot this section onto the lower lip and slide it into position. And then within perhaps 20 seconds you have a really nice sunbathing space for perhaps 3 people. But what's even more impressive about this is the fact that at no stage, whether you're using it as a dining station or a sunbathing station, does this port walkway get filled up with clutter. You can still make your way all the way from the transom via this integrated step right up onto this step through forepeak. And this, of course, is where that bow flare we talked about earlier comes into its own. We've got tremendous breadth up here. And rather cleverly, the designers, by offsetting that anchor to port, means that you've always got access to step off at the bow. Now with that aft cockpit and that forward day space, we've got capacity on this boat for 9 people. So let's pop down to the cabin and see how all of that impacts on the sleeping spaces. Now when you get down in here, the first thing you notice is the lovely pale Nordic fit out. Pale woods, pale cushions, everything very simplistic and modern, and that helps make a relatively compact space feel a little larger. Second thing you notice, of course, is the bed. I mean, we do have a port walkway, so it's a little tighter to that port side, but remarkably you still get a window on the port side at the head end, so when you're lying down in bed you can see the water surface. And I've previously popped down here and lain myself out full length. I'm 6 foot and there's a good 5-6 inches spare above and beyond me, so there's plenty of space here to really enjoy a night's sleep. There's also a little bit of shelving on both sides for your essentials, plus that hatch up above. We have the kind of ambient lighting around those shelving, plus we have the spotlights above here. But of course there's no space for a separate heads compartment. There has to be a compromise made somewhere, and that's this. And what we do have is a sink. We have an electric toilet with macerator and a waste tank a little further aft. But I quite like this solution. You know, we've got a bench on the port side to sit and change, and if you want an additional place to sit and change, you simply lower this partition above the toilet, so that's no problem at all. And you do, as an option, have a privacy curtain as well that you can just pull out and around this toilet section. That's fine. I know if I was staying on here with my wife, the moment she needed to visit the toilet, she would exile me to the pontoon for 20 minutes until she was fully done, curtain or no curtain. But this is a day boat, and given its likely application and its likely buyer, this remains a pretty bright and impressive place. Well, so far so good, but we have a 20 knot westerly blowing out there in a wind over tide situation. It's already kicking up a bit, so before it kicks off too much, we're going to take this boat out and see exactly what she can do. We've been on the water for a good couple of hours now, having a play in some pretty lively swells. But before we get around to talking about the performance of the boat itself, I'd like to talk about the helm position and also the co-pilot position, because it's often kind of disregarded, a little bit forgotten, but on this boat it's really superb, I have to say. These seats as standard come with a little bit of lateral support there to keep you in position when the seas get lively, plus this bolster. If you fancy sitting down, there's also a fold down footrest beneath you and this central bar that you can keep hold of. If you fancy a more sort of action position where you stand yourself up, brace your feet against the cabin door, there's another grab rail in a really good position just ahead of you. So it's a really useful, really engaged position for the co-pilot as well as the driver. Now when you step into the main helm position, and this has all the hallmarks of a proper, well-sorted finished boat. It might be a very young boat and a young brand for that matter, but it's clear that there's a bit of know-how and a bit of experience behind the setup here. For a start, like the co-pilot, we've got a dedicated foot brace, we've got a bolster, we've got grab handles everywhere. We've also got, rather usefully, a cleat right here on the moulding to the starboard side of the helm. That's very easy just to use if you're operating single-handed, just to bring yourself alongside. In terms of the equipment itself, well, aside from the rather lovely 6-spoke Quarken steering wheel, we've got the throttle falling very nicely to hand on the starboard side, and directly next to that, and this is by no means a common occurrence, we've got the trim tabs right next to your throttle hand, exactly where you would want them. The steering wheel is very adjustable, so you can put it right up, angle it right up and just stand, even without the bolster. Look right out over that screen, and again everything falls very nicely to hand. In the centre here, just behind the steering wheel, we've got a wireless phone charging pad. We've also got on this particular boat 2 12-inch Garmin Plotters. I think one tends to come as standard with the comfort pack, but this has been upgraded with a premium pack, which means 2 of those plotters, plus the Yamaha display in the centre of the screen there. We've got the bow thruster, falls nicely to hand on the port side. And we've got a couple of cup holders with little LED inserts. This one, incidentally, is full of seawater from the fun and games we just had, so that needs a drain hole, but the other one does have one, so that's just an anomaly, I would have thought. Elsewhere, we've got a couple of USB points just below here with a useful spot for storing your gear that needs charging, plus a fusion stereo down below there, and a compass as standard in your line of sight, so you don't have to search for it. Everything feels exactly as you would want it. Now, I was mentioning this F300 and how, relative to some of the competition, it seemed perhaps a little low powered for a boat of this scale and this type, but it's been doing a tremendous job today in rough waters and smooth. And if we get her right up to speed, she'll plane in 5.5 seconds. She'll pass 20 knots in 8 seconds, 30 knots in 12 seconds. She'll be right up to 40 knots in about 20 seconds. And then when you throw her into a turn, she preserves a good bit of that pace without backing off. And when the seas get really very lively, there's a little bit of slip in at the prop, and you've got to bury that leg again just to re-engage, just to get the grip back. But once you're back underway, it does everything you would want pretty well, I have to say. We'll swing around to starboard again. There's a decent bit of hill for a stepped hull. It doesn't grip and carve, there's a little bit of slip, which feels quite satisfying. It's very manageable, it's not a difficult thing to deal with, it's in no way disconcerting, and it's actually a lot of fun to play with. Now in those, it's relatively flat in here because we're sitting in the lee of the land, but in those particularly large rollers, quite messy rollers that we were playing in, and there must have been between perhaps 2 and 3 metres from peak to trough. And although there were elements from time to time when the ride kind of stiffened up, those moments where you got to actually open the throttle and give her a little extra and pick a path through the seascape, she showed commendable agility and very decent ride softness from the forward quarters of that hull, because that hull is not necessarily as fine an entry as you would see on a boat, for instance, like the Axopar. But having tried her in those sort of 2.5, 3 metre swells, and tried her also in the flat here, and having seen what she offers in terms of her internal deck space and her lower deck accommodation, the guys behind the Quarken brand have started with a boat that has a tremendously broad array of talents. Well, we're back alongside, and it's fair to say we've had a lot of fun with this boat today. We've taken her out in seas for which she wasn't designed. We've taken her out in the kinds of seas that most owners would never even consider taking her out in. And for the most part, she did a really sterling job. I mean, there were slams, of course, and we all got comprehensively wet. There's no two ways about that. But when we got her back into the more sheltered waters in the lee of the land, where there's the shorter, steeper, sort of 2-3 foot chop, the sort of things for which she was designed. Performance was excellent. We pushed right onto 43 knots and we got around about 1.6, 1.7 litres per nautical mile out of her in terms of running efficiency, which is much closer to the 1.4 litres that they quote. And then there's the deck layout. I mean, it's very easy in this really talented sector of the market, the fast weekender market, to say, well, the 27 doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. You know, for instance, it doesn't have a shower cubicle or an enclosed heads compartment. It doesn't have a wet bar or a galley. And you can get those things from competitor models. It's all true. Even if you want a wet bar or a galley or a shower, none of those things are available on the options list. But what this boat does provide is one of the most versatile and user-friendly deck layouts you're ever going to see on a boat of this scale. There's plenty of configurable furniture, plenty of space for 9 people to enjoy it fully, and that's where it's in its element. As a day boat, as a specialist day boat with a little bit of storage space down below. As for price, this boat can be yours as a base price on the water, including VAT, for £116,000. And this test boat, which is pretty high spec as you see, can still be yours for well under £140,000. Now at that price, and considered in the appropriate context as a day boat, this is going to be a serious contender.